Hi, welcome everyone. We have today a session with myself and Paul that we gave recently at the COBIS conference as well. And we felt that actually we had a few people who were not able to make that or weren't able to attend the session and have had similar questions. So we thought we'd go through this together for people online as well. It's the benefits of being able to do both these days. So what we'll go through is first, I'll take you through what we found at GL using GL data in the last couple of years. We've had a lot of data come through from our assessments, and we've been looking at trends and patterns. We're going to continue to do that this summer as well. And Paul will also be taking you through from the FFT side and looking at grades and some of those examination trends that have been coming through as well. So today, if you've got any questions, as Andy says, please do pop them into the Q&A. We've got about 40 minutes of presentation and certainly time for questions at the end. So please do pop them in and we can try and address them at the end. So let's go through what we now have found at GL, looking at what we call post-COVID assessment analysis. So after the last 2 years worth of testing, what have we sort of found? So firstly, we'll be concentrating on the progress test series, which is an assessment series based for ages 7 to 15. Certainly in the UK, it's used for ages 7 to 14. Actually, international schools do have an additional age of 15 that we have a level for. We cover English, maths and science tests. They all follow the English national curriculum. And we have several years worth of data. So we're actually lucky enough that we also have pre-pandemic trends, a pre-pandemic standardization that we can compare against, so that we have a sort of benchmark to have a look at to see what's actually happened over the last couple of years. We also have the new group reading test, which is an adaptive reading assessment, also digital, and based mainly around age 7 to 15. You can take it if you're older. There are some actually children who, if they start reading younger, can actually take the test from younger as well. But broadly speaking, the analysis here that I'll be focusing on is on that age range of 7 to 15. And actually, for the first time, I'll be giving you results from the spelling test, so the new group spelling test, which has been around for several years, but we haven't really done too much focus on that in the past. So you can just have a look at whether there are any trends within spelling as well that we've seen. The testing windows are important, just to go over. So summer 2019 was pre-pandemic, so that's the baseline almost. So we took any tests that were taken in the summer period for the PT series, May to end of June, which is essentially the end of the academic year here in the UK, and in a lot of international schools that we work with. We then took the deferred summer 2020 window. So for us, because a lot of schools around the world were closed in summer 2020, those schools deferred their testing to September and end of October. So we took that as a testing window for the second time point. And now we have the additional time point from last summer 2021, May to the end of June. We're obviously now in the middle of June 2022, and so this summer we're going to be looking at additional time points as well to see whether any gaps that we did find have closed even further. And I'll take you through the trends now. Important that the number of students are taken into account for this. At GL, we do have a lot of assessments that are taken every year, which means that, you know, often we can ascribe this to a national sort of trend for the UK, and we even have international schools in there at quite sizable numbers. When I'm looking at comparisons, I look at differences between scores from 2019, so pre-pandemic, to summer 2020, and then I look at, as a second difference, the summer 2019 to autumn 2021 as another time point. And I think that's just it's going to give us a nice comparison of the differences between those SAS scores at the time. We generally find in maths and English around 150 to 200,000 tests are taken, and that's across all of those age groups that I mentioned before. Science is less popular, but still quite sizable sample sizes there as well. NGRT, as you can see, is nice large numbers. And we include in here English primary schools, secondary state schools, UK independent schools, Northern Irish schools, which can be a separate group as well. Schools outside of the UK then are called what we call international schools. And they're all within our samples, but we do subgroup them into that because we have found that there were different trends depending on what type of school you were. Important measure as well, just up front, we generally tend to look at the SAS, so the standard age score, and this looks at a student performance on the test in relation to the UK at the time of the standardization. So it's that comparison to the original standardization at the time, but it also takes age into account. And that's important, as we know, children develop at different ages, at different sort of rates of development. A SAS of 100, so the key number that you need to be looking at, a SAS of 100 means a child is performing as expected. So that's given the age and ability of the UK population. Anything sort of higher than that is better than average performance, and lower numbers indicate below average performance. When looking at large cohorts, and this is particularly important for the analysis I'm going to go through, we generally say that 3 SAS point difference is seen as worthy of further investigation. So that's what you need to be thinking about when I'm looking at a difference between one time point to another. If it's more than 3 SAS points difference, then we're talking about something where we don't see normal fluctuation up or down. And I'll talk about that more as we go through. So what did we find? Well, the first subject that I'll concentrate on is maths for primaries, secondaries and independent schools. We found the following trends. So we found that SAS generally dropped for our cohort of children by about 6.6 SAS points for primaries, 4 SAS points for English secondaries and 2.6 for independent schools. So we found that generally there was a significant difference for English primaries and secondaries in that first year of the pandemic. Now that's really important. It was quite shocking at the time to see. I think there was a lot of conversations with schools at the time where they were worried that that attainment was dropping, and how were children doing. And actually here you can see that there was that gap. And what we've seen now, so when you compare to 2021 back to the original pre-pandemic levels, that SAS difference has shortened again to 1.3 for primaries and 1.8. And actually for independent schools, it's closed almost completely. So that's been a really interesting trend back up. I've been calling it a bounce back almost. And remember, we're talking about averages at this point. In science, we had a drop of 5.5 SAS points for those English primaries, about 3 SAS points for secondaries, and independent schools saw a drop of 5.3. So actually in science, we did see an effect there going on, not quite the same as maths, but still something was definitely happening with science. And there's various reasons why we think that could have been affected in that way, which I'll touch on later. In the bounce back in science, actually in primaries, we've still seen that there is a significant difference. So 3 SAS points, 3.1 SAS points for primaries and 2.5 for secondaries. So it's slightly closed for secondaries now in science. And again, there could be various reasons for this in terms of how science was being taught in the last year, especially in the last couple of years, and how it's changed as a sense of normality has come back. Children are able to share equipment and things like that back in school again in the science labs, for example. In English, so progress tests in English, we saw this was the least affected of the 3 subjects in progress tests, with a gap of 3.4 was significant at the time in 2020, but actually that gap has now shortened to 1.8 in English primaries, for 2 SAS points for secondaries, and in independent schools, again, as you can see, that same trend of it's less than a SAS point difference between them. So that was a very interesting finding, and we spoke to many schools about that at the time to see why that gap, why this subject was the least effective of all of them, and then why now it's actually seems to be going back to previous sort of fluctuations that we would naturally see. In reading, more specifically, so reading as a skill, this was measured by the NGRT, so the adaptive reading test, we didn't see much of an effect originally during the pandemic, in the first year of the pandemic, and that, as you can see, has even more so has lessened to less than a SAS point difference for most of the schools. In fact, we've seen a slight increase in independent schools to 0.8. But again, that's it's not something that we are saying is a significant difference. It's basically returning to pre-pandemic and standardization normality. And here's your spelling. So just for a comparison, we saw a drop in 2021 of 1 SAS point. So we would say that that's within the normal range of fluctuation. We actually saw an increase in spelling tests in 2021 of 2 SAS points, and around the same 0.3 for independent schools. Just to show you international schools, we have, I'm sure, international schools on the call. We've got maths, science and English were all drops in that first year of the pandemic compared to 2019. And we've seen, as you can see, that return, that bounce back happening. So we've actually got on the plus side of SAS compared to 2019 and 2021. In fact, in reading and spelling skills particularly, you can see that some children have really even strengthened their skills there and actually done better than before, within that 3 SAS point range. So, you know, have a look at these results, think about those differences and see whether actually you've had any kind of, is that similar? Did you see a similar subject trend within your school? Did you see that maths and science, you know, was a struggle for a lot of your students, English less so, and reading almost, you know, almost unaffected? Or was it that you had, you know, different students were learning at different rates? And again, I just remind you that these are looking at averages, and they're averages over hundreds of thousands of students as well. And obviously within that, there is a range. And that's what I'll just take you through now as an example, showing that, you know, mean SAS change can vary by school. So if I just take you through this graph, what we've got here is the blue line shows the difference between 2018 and 2019. And that shows the trend within the schools that you would normally see. So the majority, the median of schools see 0 difference in SAS between year 2018 to year 2019. And that's that high peak of that blue line there that you can see on the graph, with more than 15% of schools kind of seeing very little change. Either side of that, you see about -5 to +5 difference, and then it starts getting much less and less, fewer and fewer schools are seeing very large differences. And that's what I would say is the normal trend that you would expect to see. When you then look at the difference between 2019 and 2020, and the difference between 2019 and 2021, you see a shift to the left, which is that average shifting to the left, but you also see a lot more schools getting those much wider ranges of drops for their SAS. So you've even got, if you look at to the left side of that graph, you've got 2020, you've got a lot more proportion of schools getting even -12, -15 SAS point differences and drops, which you don't see as much anymore now that we have gone back to a little bit of normality. What I would say is you can see that there are some schools, obviously to the right of the graph, that did okay. Even during the pandemic, there were some schools who were seeing increases in their SAS scores. And this is where perhaps the schools that we've spoken to were able to flip their learning quite quickly to be online. They were able to support more. They had parents who were able to support. They had teachers who were able to navigate the technology much more quickly. And so we were able to see that shift even during the pandemic. And those are those schools who made that sort of increase in their SAS. Just looking at gender difference, because we do look at subgroup analysis, you can see that girls and boys are back to being in line with the SAS observed in 2019. We usually see differences in English, so we usually see that girls do better than boys, and that's where that plus difference is. So it's girls minus boys in this graph. So the orange shows the green, orange shows the English scores. The blue, which is below the 0, shows that boys do slightly better than girls generally, but actually that's within 3 SAS points difference, so it's not significant. And in science, you see very little difference in gender. In English as an additional language, we know that this is an important one, especially for international schools, and increasingly so for English schools as well. In 2019, we saw a difference of 3 SAS points. That's what we would say is a normal difference between EAL students and non-EAL students. But in 2021, actually, the difference was not only in English, but also in maths and science. And there's various reasons as well, just having spoken anecdotally to schools about this, where we believe that it's potentially to do the kind of vocabulary that the children were exposed to over the last couple of years. They weren't able to access really the language, the technical language that perhaps they need for maths and science. And they may not have had that support at home, but maybe they were able to continue with their reading and have the language support a little bit more so. So that's been an interesting finding for us. Generally speaking, just to summarize, we have found that 2019 levels have been returning. So we have seen that bounce back, as I mentioned, but that range, keep in mind that graph that I showed earlier, where that range of schools who are at either end of that scale, where they're potentially even getting more than 10 SAS points difference, is still quite broad. And what we want to see is that return more to the 2018 and 19 differences. Reading overall remained unaffected. Spelling also was at levels we recorded in 2019. Younger and older students, we often get asked this, are actually performing similarly again now. We did see that there were slight differences before with the primary and secondary schools, but actually they are performing more similarly now as they were before. And girls and boys are back to their usual trends that we have observed pre-pandemic, with girls outperforming boys in English and males in maths, and that the gap for students in EAL is similar for PTE, but worse actually for maths and science. Now we'll be moving on to the slides from FFT. So Paul, I can see that you're back on screen. If you just don't mind switching, yes, you can now see that you're sharing.
Great, thank you, Bernie. So I'm going to have a look now at sort of similar set of trends, really. What's happened to national examination trends over the last couple of years, where we've obviously had an unusual period of teacher or centre assessed grades replacing the normal examinations, and what are we expecting to happen this year and next year as we certainly in the UK are returning fully to normal examinations, and for international schools across the world, again, that will be mostly returning to examinations. There may be a few schools in some places where that's not possible, but the general trend is obviously back to full examinations for all students. I'm going to look at sort of GCSE, IGCSE and A-level, and the picture is largely the same across all three. Let's just start with GCSE. This chart here comes from Ofqual, who regulate GCSE examinations in the UK. And it's just showing GCSE outcomes for all subjects over the last sort of 13, 14 years. And it's a good reminder, actually, that exam standards have remained remarkably consistent across time over that period, despite some changes in policy and obviously some changes, particularly with GCSEs, to the way they're graded and to specifications and things like coursework. By and large, the proportion of students achieving both the higher grades of grade A or grade 7 and above, and the sort of the middle grades upwards, grade C and above, have remained largely static, with the exception of obviously the last 3 years. So in 2020 and 2021, where we had to use teacher assessed grades, there has been an increase in the proportion of students achieving both grade C or grade 4 and above, and the very highest grades. And we know why that is. We know that is because with teachers being able to look at a broader range of evidence that was available within school over a longer period of time, teachers have quite rightly made a judgment based on the evidence in front of them. So if you've got 10 students who you think will get a grade C and above, teachers are quite right to give those students those grades. The reality is, in an examination, some of those students would achieve lower grades. That's just the reality of examinations. On a day with a couple of hours examination assessing a full course, some of those students will get the grade you expect, some might get higher, some will get lower. And that's the main reason why we have the difference in the proportion of students getting the teacher assessed grades compared to examinations. It also explains why we tend to see greater differences at the top end, where there's really the only downside of an exam is downside more than upside. You know, if a teacher thinks their child's going to get an A or A star, that's pretty solid, and teacher assessments will back that judgment. In an exam, some of those will get for example, a B or a C. So that's GCSE. We know that the changes, the differences, or the increase in grades in the last couple of years with teacher assessed grades hasn't always been equally distributed across groups of pupils and types of schools. So, for example, on the right here, we can see that girls benefited slightly from the teacher assessed grade awarding over the last couple of years. Their results increased more. This is grade A and above here. So an increase of 10% from 24 to 34, compared to a smaller increase from 18 to 25 for boys. So in other words, just the use of teacher assessed grades has slightly benefited girls over boys on average. And we can see that different types of schools in England, which is a chart on the left, again, just looking at 3 years, 2019, 2020 and 21, we can see that some types of schools have had bigger sort of change in results from that change. So, for example, the selective schools in the UK, the selective state schools and the independent schools have seen a bigger difference between 2019 and 2021 compared, to example, to state-funded academy schools. And we also see that difference in subjects. So in some subjects, they've seen much bigger differences over the last 2 years in terms of the proportion of students getting grades than in other subjects. Look at example here on the high grades. So if we look at grades 9 to 7 or grade A and above, computing, for example, has seen a much bigger difference here on the right. Going from sort of 20% of students getting grade A or above, or 7 and above, to 40%. That's a much bigger sort of change, for example, than maths, which has been a much smaller. It's gone from sort of like 20 to 30. So some subjects have had a sort of bigger sort of change in the distribution of grades than others. We see the same differences with IGCSE data as well. There's not quite as much data in the public domain for IGCSE than the government have put out for Ofqual, but using data from Cambridge Assessment for their IGCSE courses, we can see similar volatility, let's put it that way, or variation in the last 3 years. So again, if we look at things like maths and history, just 2 examples here, certainly for maths, results have been remarkably sort of stable and static over the last couple of years. And the orange line here is IGCSE. The blue line is the GCSE data we just looked at previously. So IGCSE, GCSE, largely a sort of static sort of distribution of grades or proportion of grades awarded each year. But in the last couple of years, we've seen bigger differences. We also have a bit more variation now with IGCSE, because some courses or specifications are awarded on the 9-to-1 scale. Others are on the A-star to G, and so different centres would have opted for those different GCSE grading sort of options there. A-levels has a very similar picture. So again, this is just all A-levels over the last sort of 13 years. So again, very sort of stable distribution of results, but big changes. Again, even more pronounced at the top end there. So grades A star and above, A and A star, which is the green line. Grade C and above is the purple line there. But a big sort of change in the distribution of results, particularly at the very top grades. Again, different types of schools have sort of seen bigger increases in results in the last few years. The one that grabbed the headlines was independent schools in the UK last year. So the proportion of grades being awarded in independent schools at grade A or A star, so the very top two grades for A level, back in 2019, that was around sort of 45%. That's gone up to 75%. So almost 3/4 of students being awarded a grade A or A star in A level in 2021, much higher than in 2019. And that change is much greater than we've seen in state schools. So for example, if we look at academy schools, state-funded academies, which is a majority of secondary schools in the UK, those same numbers went up from just sort of 25% up to just over 40%. So not a larger distribution. And again, we can see differences in subjects. Some of the smaller subjects, actually music has seen the biggest change in results from 2019 to 2021 compared to perhaps some of the larger subjects, English language there at the bottom, with a much smaller change in results. So we know we've got this unusual set of results for 2020 and 2021. It was absolutely the right thing to do for schools, and most importantly for the candidates, for the students. The main focus for the last 2 years has just been getting the grade that best reflects the students' achievements and learning, and to get that grade awarded. That was a much higher priority than trying to maintain national standards or trying to produce a set of results that could be robustly used to sort of evaluate either the education system as a whole or look at the performance of individual schools. So the priority was absolutely the right one, but we know things are changing. So for 2022 and 2023, we know there has been a sort of government policy decision from Ofqual, and this will affect both the GCSEs and the IGCSEs and the A-levels, that essentially examination standards are going to return to 2019 levels. So that sort of change that we saw in 2020 and 2021 is going to be reversed. And over the next 2 years, we are going to return to 2019 levels. So in 2023, the distribution of grades nationally will be the same as it was in 2019. In 2022, it is going to be halfway between. It's going to be the average of 2019 and 2021. So it's going to be a sort of two-step return to sort of those 2019 levels. That's going to mean, in some cases, quite big changes in the distribution of grades. So one way of thinking about it is that the higher you went up over the last couple of years, whether that was as a particular subject or a particular group of pupils or as a school, the further you've got to drop to get back down to those 2019 levels there. An example there for A level is that the percentage of students getting the very highest grades, grades A and A star, is going to drop by 10% this year in 2022, and a further 10% on average in 2023. And again, there's no perfect solution here, and particularly at the A level, this is potentially going to sort of impact students that are taking those grades, who are competing in the same market for university places, for jobs. We are going to have to work hard as a sort of system to make sure that all those who are looking at those grades, whether that's for a job application, a university application, understands that you can't really compare the set of grades that a student might have been awarded in 2021 to the grades that are being awarded in 2022 and 2023. There are differences there. So it's going to be important to support students in that. But on balance, it probably is the right thing to do. There's no easy solution here. If we'd left those results unchanged, you could argue that would unfairly impact students that have taken results 3 or 4 years ago. And you just then bake in particularly things like A-level. If 75% of students are getting in selective or independent schools are getting the very highest grades, we then end up with a problem where the exam system doesn't really discriminate very well between pupils of different abilities. You can see there that that sort of comment I made by, some subjects, some groups of pupils have got further to come back than others. So, for example, if we look at some of the either bigger subjects or the subjects with biggest differences, you can see quite big swings there. So music, for example, is going to have the biggest drop in students awarded the very top grades. So a 18% drop in those students awarded grade A and A star this year in music. That compares to maths, where the difference will only come down by 7% because there was a much smaller increase in the first place. Just to say, FFT does an awful lot of research in this area. Most of these charts that I've shown you today come from FFT Education Data Lab. That's a free website where we publish every week blogs about assessment data, and a whole range of sort of areas to do with sort of the analysis of education data. So if you're interested in more detail on those, please do go to the FFT Education Data Lab website. We will be doing a lot more research when we get those 2022 results this summer. And obviously it'll be very interesting to look in a number of ways at the results at a sort of national level that students achieve this summer, and be able to sort of put it in context. Hopefully the overall message will not be a surprise. It'll be the message that I've spoken about here, what we're expecting to happen. And I think we can be confident that the exam board and Ofqual and those regulating the exams will make sure that is done in a fair and transparent way. So coming on to the sort of final sort of slot for today's webinar, the question is, thinking about what Bernie said about the standards in reading and maths and science and spelling from the GL assessment data, thinking about what we know's happened with national examinations and the trends both the past and what's going to happen over the next couple of years. What does all of this mean about evaluating school performance? And for you as schools and as school leaders and teachers, what can you be doing to sort of try and put into context the achievements and education outcomes of your pupils this year and next year? So I think, the first thing to say, particularly about national examinations, is that we are returning to a much more robust set of national education outcomes data. They will be based on examinations. There's no reason to suggest that the examinations won't be as robust as they always are this year. We should have a good set of data that is fair and accurate across all schools. And unlike previous years where there's been an element of uncertainty about what's happening, how are we going to actually create those grades, there is good clarity. We know they're based on exams. We know what's going to be done in terms of those national standards and where they're heading. And those examinations will provide a robust enough data set for schools to be able to start returning to using, to looking at your school's outcomes in comparison to national benchmarks and other schools. Over the last 2 years, that's not been possible, and it's not been the focus, it's not been the priority in any way. This year, with the return of national examinations, it will be possible for schools again to start to look at the sort of GCSE, A-level, IGCSE examinations data, and to start using that to sort of understand your performance. And I've put there, I think there are really important reasons why you would want to do that. We can see from the data, we know from schools that COVID will have impacted schools in very different ways. We know there has been an element of learning loss. There are students that have not had the normal teaching and learning experience that the students would have had in the past. And this will be really the first chance for us to be able to look at a very large scale at a national level with sort of GCSE A-level data and what impacts that is having on schools and on the education system. It will also help you as a school to help sort of focus on strengths. So what are the strengths of your school? Where's your school developed over the last couple of years? But also it will help you focus on any areas for improvement. And again, that's been very hard to do with examinations data over the last few years, but with a more robust data set, that becomes much more possible. That said, I think there are some important principles and things for school leaders to consider when looking at your 2022 examination results and your school's performance. And I think schools will be interested and will want to dive down into that data and analyze and evaluate your performance. But there are some things that are probably important to consider and to keep in the back of your mind. The first thing is not to place too much emphasis on 2022 data alone. Even in normal times, we would say this is a good principle. You can only say so much from looking at 1 year's results alone. It tells you a snapshot in time. And that's always true. It's even more true this year. Don't sort of jump on 2 or 3 things that you think are absolutely sort of standing out from these results and sort of need addressing. You need to look over time. So in particular, don't compare 2022 to 2021 and 2020. You're going to have to be pretty careful there. They are different sort of sets of data, really. Probably 2019 is a more likely or more robust sort of benchmark comparison. But again, looking over time is going to be important. And in some ways, it's the journey from 2022 and to 2023 that will get us back to a more normal set of examination results that are sort of back to where they were in 2019. So do look at results over time. Don't just look at sort of one set of results in isolation. Be pragmatic. Look at a range of performance measures. You can see some of those charts that I showed you there by choosing a different indicator. So looking at either A star to C or A star to A, we can make the case that something's changed in a very different way. So be careful about just focusing on one performance measure. Again, this is a principle that applies all the time, really. Use a range of performance measures, so particularly average grade, as well as threshold measures, measures around the percentage of students getting grade C or above or grade A and above. The average grade will be a useful measure alongside those, and look at them together to try and see what's happening. Look at both attainment and value added. So attainment is telling you your sort of raw attainment, your education outcomes for a group of students. Value added, I'll talk a bit about that in a minute, is a fairer measure that looks at progress from a sort of start and end point. It looks at the progress, the value adding as a school. And you'll need to sort of drill down as you would always do and look at performance in different ways. So drill down below that overall school performance measure, have a look at performance by subjects, by pupil groups, and do put your school's results in context. You can only get so much insight and analysis from looking at your school's results alone. You'll be wanting to look at your school's results in the context to national performance, to external benchmarks. And again, I'll talk a bit about the work that FFT and GL do to help schools with that now. So just to sort of finish before we sort of pause for questions and any feedback or questions you might have. Value added, I think, is a really important way of looking at school results. Schools have been doing this for many years. There are a number of ways in which you can do value added analysis. FFT and GL have a service which is freely available to all schools that use Cat 4 assessments. And that does a value added analysis which takes the Cat 4 assessment or the Cat 4 score as a starting point. And that Cat 4 assessment might have been done in year 7 or year 9 or year 10. For GCSE, we can then look at the value added or the progress or the impact that you've had as a school from that baseline to GCSE and look at the pupil progress. And we can compare your value added progress to the progress for other schools. And it provides a much fairer way of sort of looking at school performance. We're not going to go into detail about that today. If you're interested in looking at that, please do get in touch with us. But we provide, it's a very easy service for schools to take part in. You get a set of web-based reports that compare your school's attainment and value added to other schools, and we include both England benchmarks in there and also benchmarks for international and private schools. We can break it down by subjects, pupils, and actually at the bottom right there, we can drill right down to look at value added for each individual child. And the scatter plots that we provide are very popular and very sort of useful reports for teachers to drill down and actually see what's happening behind an overall score for a class, for a subject, for a school, and to look at the variation and the progress made by individual students. If you're interested in the value added service, please do sort of get in touch with us. Andy will talk a bit more about that at the end. As I say, it's a service that is sort of a part of the Cat 4 assessments that you've already will be using for some of you. We have 3 different ways of doing value added. So we can do it for GCSE using Cat 4 as a baseline. We have an A-level service that measures value added from GCSE to A-level, and we can also do it for IB schools as well. And it's a very quick and easy service for you to engage with. Obviously, GL and FFT, we already have the Cat 4 data for your students. So it's simply a matter of providing your GCSE, A-level, IB examinations in a simple spreadsheet upload in August or July for IB when those results become available. And within a week, you will get the set of reports that are available there. So I hope that's been useful. I know it's not entirely straightforward in terms of analysing your exam results this year, but I do think this is a big change and obviously a big step back to having a much more normal set of national examination results that we can use this year and schools can use. That said, hopefully the sort of some of the things that I've spoken about today will help put the sort of analysis of your school's results in context of what's happened nationally over the last couple of years, and will help you just approach the analysis of results in a sort of pragmatic and sort of straightforward way when the results come. Andy, I will pass back to you.